Introduction to Anatomy. What is human anatomy? Human anatomy, including histology and gross anatomy, is the study of the structures of the human body. The discipline of human anatomy involves the identification and description of the structures within the human body. What's in a name? Answer everything. Due to the fact that most anatomical names come from Latin and Greek, these words have meaning in their original language, and it is very helpful and interesting to know the root meaning of these words, which is called etymology, as it helps in the learning process. Therefore, becoming familiar with the etymology of the anatomical term "s" is an important component of studying human anatomy. For example, the word anatomy comes from the Greek language, composed of ana up or apart, and toma cutting. Therefore, the word anatomy means cutting up or apart. As will become evident, the dissection aspects of anatomy are especially important as we study human anatomy. In general, anatomy can be divided into gross anatomy and microscopic anatomy. Gross anatomy in the healthcare field. Gross anatomy, macroscopic anatomy refers to the study of structures that can be seen with the naked eye, such as most bones and muscles. Gross anatomy may involve dissection or non invasive methods in order to examine regions. The objective is to gain insight about the larger structures of organs and organ systems and how they are interconnected. Microscopic anatomy, also known as histology, histo-tissue, ologiac study, is the study of tissues that are too small to be seen with the naked eye and therefore require the use of various microscopes. Microscopy commonly involves studying tissues and cells that have been prepared by histological techniques in order to provide visual contrast of the different aspects of the specimen under examination. Sectioning and staining tissues is how the histological slides we will examine are prepared. Typically, tissue is treated with preserving and other agents which allow for the sectioning of tissue, which is cutting tissue into very thin slices. Histological stains such as hematoxylin and eusin, HI, are commonly added to the specimens in order to create and enhance visual contrast. The various stains generate different colors and intensities based primarily on the chemistry of the tissue and the dye lipid, protein, acidic, basic, etc. This yield tissues they can be more easily distinguished when they are examined under a microscope, light, or electron. General information as mentioned in anatomy, there is an emphasis on word roots and meanings. There are also a lot of words to become familiar with, and it becomes crucial to keep up with the enormous vocabulary content in this course. One of the best techniques is associating the root term with something that is already familiar. For example, the prefix hypo means below or under, and the term chondro is associated with cartilage, and a part of ribs are made of cartilage. Thus, the term hypochondral refers to an anatomical region of the body under the ribs. Please note a hypochondriac, someone who frequently believes they are ill, will often wave their hands around their tummy and declare they are not feeling well. It will become very useful to relate as many anatomical structures to their root words in order to better understand their meaning. It is also valuable to be able to relate the concepts we study to everyday life as much as possible. Another important aspect is to know that grammatical constructs also relate to anatomical terms, resulting in similar looking words with different endings which indicate use as nouns and adjectives, as ser, e.g. Cranium is the noun and cranial is the adjective. In addition, anatomy uses many diminutives, a way of modifying a word to convey smallness or another quality of the object, or to convey a sense of endearment. A great example of this is organ and organelle. Organelle is almost a way of saying teeny tiny little organ. Note generally the longer the word, the smaller the structure. In anatomy, there are often several terms for one structure. In the past, it was common to name structures after the discoverer's name. These are called eponyms. Currently, the more preferred terminology is that which is descriptive rather than named with an eponym. The descriptive name often describes function, location, shape, etc. However, it is important that students become familiar with both the eponym and the descriptive anatomical terminology. Here is an example. Compare eustachian tube with auditory tube. An Italian eustacia was cited as the first to describe this anatomical structure, but this name gives no indication as to its role or location. However, it is likely that the word auditory suggests a role for this structure in sound or a location that has something to do with the ear. There are many examples. Here are a few more that we will encounter: Achilles tendon, calcaneal tendon of the heel; Bowman's capsule, glomerular capsule of the nephron in the kidney; Cowper's gland, bulbourethral gland of the male reproductive system; fallopian tubes, uterine tubes of the female reproductive system; Graafian follicle, mature follicle of the female gamete or the egg cell; Kupffer cell, macrophages of the liver; islets of Langerhans, pancreatic islets of the pancreas where hormones are made; Meissner's corpuscle, tactile corpuscle for touch sensation in the dermis of skin. Nissel bodies, ribosomes within nerve cell bodies. Sphincter of Oddi, hepatopancreatic sphincter to control the flow of bile and pancreatic juices. Pacinian corpuscle, lamellated corpuscle for pressure sensation deep in dermis of skin. Node of Ranvier, myelin sheath gaps along the length of myelinated axons of neurons. Canal of Sclem, scleral venous sinus which drains aqueous humor of the eyeball. Introduction to the study of anatomy, structure, anatomy, and function physiology are closely correlated in the human body. It is important to understand the connection between form and function when studying anatomy, as the form shape of a structure is strongly indicative of what it does function. This approach to the study of anatomy is called functional anatomy, and it is the approach that we use in this course. Levels of organization. This describes examining things from the fundamental building blocks and ascending to more complex and larger structures. Below are the levels of organization for human anatomy listed from simplest to most complex. 1. Molecules 5. Tissues 2 or 6. Organs 3. 7 organ systems 4. Organism. Any basic anatomy textbook will show this type of order of structures listed above and give specific examples of each level. This is also an example of how the course is constructed. We go from microstructures to macrostructures. Basic functions of living organisms: responsiveness, growth, differentiation, metabolism, movement, reproduction, excretion. 4. Each system we study in human anatomy, see below, will contain various components of these functions. We commence the study of human anatomy with histology, the study of tissues. This microanatomy requires the use of microscopes and the identification of not only the four primary tissue, but also the elements such as cells, fibers, and other material that these tissues are composed of. The system studied in anatomy tissues, four primary tissues: epithelium, muscular vessels, integumentary, skin, hair, nails, and glands; skeletal bones, cartilage, articulations; muscular, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscles; nervous, nerves, glial cells; central nervous system, NS; peripheral, NS, and autonomic, NS; special senses: eyes, ears, olfaction, equilibrium, and taste; endocrine, primary and secondary endocrine glands; cardiovascular, heart, arteries, capillaries, veins; lymphatic, lymph ducts, nodes; organs, tissues; respiratory, lungs, bronchial tree; digestive, mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, colon, liver, pancreas; urinary, kidney, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra; reproductive, ovary, uterine tube, uterus, vagina; tests: epididymis, ductus deferens, glands, urethra, penis. IV. Regions of the body. The four quadrants division: right upper quadrant right, lower quadrant. See your lab. Manual Andor, any basic anatomy textbook for a diagram of these regions. B. The descriptive abdominopelvic regions: right and left hypochondriac, right and left lumbar, right and left iliac, inguinal, epigastric, umbilical, hypogastric. V. Planes of the body. A. Frontal coronal plane divides body into front and back portions. B. Transverse cross. Horizontal plane divides body into superior and inferior portions. C. Sagittal, mid, and parasagittal plane divides body into left and right portions. Mid-sagittal means equal left and right portions, whereas parasagittal means unequal left and right portions. Three-dimensional 3D visualization of structures in books can be difficult, especially reconstruction of serial slices of organs or of tissues. Try to think of common items first, like a pencil or an apple, and what would be exposed in a series of slices of the objects, or as viewed from different sides or perspectives. The figure to the right is also helpful as it shows the three planes of the body, as well as the directional terms commonly used in anatomy. The body cavities within the human body are cavities which help to contain, compartmentalize, and protect the various organs and structures in the body, and also allow all structures to be interconnected. For these body cavities, there is correct anatomical terminology. In the human, there are several body cavities, with additional more discrete cavities within the larger ones. In general, there are two large separate body cavities in our bodies: the dorsal body cavity in the back, shown in green in the image below. As you can see, the dorsal cavity has two cavities within it: the cranial cavity, which is enclosed within the bones of the skull and houses the brain, and the spinal cavity enclosed by the bones of the vertebral column, which contains the spinal cord. The ventral body cavity in the front, shown in yellow in the image below. The larger ventral cavity has two main divisions, which are separated by the diaphragm, the primary muscle of respiration, which are also body cavities within the ventral body cavity. It contains the thoracic cavity, which is enclosed by the ribcage and contains the lungs within the pleural cavities. Mediastinum area in between two lungs and the heart within the pericardial cavity. The abdominopelvic cavity contains many large internal organs, including the liver, stomach, intestines, with the bladder and reproductive structures situated within in the bony pelvic basin. 10. The image below at right provides a more detailed visual of how the thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic cavities are arranged in the ventral cavity. List contents in body cavity brain protected by bones of the skull, also covered by meningeal layers and bathed in cerebrospinal fluid CSF. Spinal cord protected by the vertebrae of the spinal column, further protected by the spinal meninges and CSFF. Two cavities containing the R and L lungs, surrounded by pleural fluid. The area in between the two lungs contains the heart, thymus gland, trachea, esophagus, aorta, great veins, and nerves. Contains the heart bathed in pericardial fluid. Stomach, small intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, and the colon. Bladder, rectum, lower colon, and reproductive organs. VI, anatomical position. The anatomical position is a very useful way to create a standard frame of reference for the body. This position is used when describing a person's anatomy in order to maintain a standard frame of reference for body orientation. The anatomical position or standard anatomical position is standing upright, feet together, facing forward, arms at your sides with palms facing forward anterior. This is called the supine position. When the palms are facing posterior, it is called the prone position. Again, the anatomical position is used as a universal frame of reference for body orientation in the healthcare field. Here is an example of where it is very useful. If a person were to ask, is the stomach inferior to the diaphragm? The answer will not depend on whether someone is standing on their head or bent over, etc. We can safely assume the description is with reference to the anatomical position. Most often, if the term anatomical position is used, it is referring to a person standing, unless otherwise indicated. When a subject is laying down, then supine refers to laying on their back and prone is laying on their stomach. Superior, inferior, posterior, anterior, dorsal, ventral, deep, superficial, distal, proximal, lateral, medial, VII. Anatomical directions, terms used to describe specific directions in the body. VIII. Body cavities, dorsal cavity contains brain and spinal cord, cranial bones, and vertebrae. Ventral cavity is divided by the diaphragm skeletal muscle for breathing into thoracic cavity, which contains mediastinum located between the lungs. It contains the esophagus, aorta, nerves, thymus, and trachea, and the pericardial cavity containing the heart. Pleura cavity containing the lungs, one left and one right lung. Abdominopelvic cavity. This cavity is separated by an imaginary plane into abdominal cavity containing most of the viscera. Pelvic cavity containing the urinary bladder, female reproductive, and rectum. All of the ventral internal body cavities mentioned above, pericardium, pleura, and peritoneum, are lined by a serous membrane. These body cavities are not directly exposed to the outside world, unlike the respiratory tract, for example, and need a moist and slippery surface in order to reduce the friction of two surfaces moving across each other. Review of the cell. Can you guess approximately how many cells are in the human body? The human body is made up of trillions of cells, from 50 to 60 trillion to be more exact. These cells can vary dramatically in size, shape, and function. If we stop to think about how amazing this is, we will be very impressed with ourselves. These trillions of cells act as a well coordinated community that functions as a whole organism. When we are in balanced, good health, these cells do not compete with or destroy each other. On the contrary, they cooperate and focus on specific tasks that their environment calls for. If cells are competing and destroying each other, using resources but providing no function or even obstructing the function of other cells, this is indicative of a disease state. The focus of this course is the functional anatomy of a healthy, balanced body. Of the trillions of cells, there are only about 200 different types of cells in the human body. For example, hepatocytes are found in the liver. Neurons help make up nervous tissue. Osteocytes are found in bone tissue. Adipocytes are found in fat adipose tissue, and so on. Within the human body, most cells have some basic properties in common, and we will quickly review them. Cell structure. Cell membrane functions as almost everything. It creates the cell boundary, separating the inside of the cell from the outside, allows for adhesion and attachments to other membranes, has receptors for hormones, neurotransmitters, and other signals for communication, has identifying markers to indicate function to other cells. Special features on cells may include cilia. These are hair-like structures that arise from the exposed apical end of some cells. Their role is for the movement of substances across surface of the cell, e.g., mucus. Microvilli, extensions of cell membrane, to increase the surface area of cell for exchange, e.g., to increase the rate of absorption. 3. Flagellum, a whip-like structure for the movement of the entire cell, e.g., a spermatozoa. II. Cell membrane permeability. What substances can move across the plasma membrane of a cell? The degree of permeability varies. Impermeable, this type of membrane restricts the passage of all molecules. Selectively permeable, this cell membrane lets certain molecules through but not others. Highly permeable lets almost anything through the cell membrane. III. Cell attachments and junctions. Tight junction near free surface apical end of epithelium. Watertight seal desmosome lightly tacks cells together, usually deep to the surface basal end. Hemidesmosome tethers cell to basement membrane where cells are anchored. Gap junction physical opening between two cells permits direct communication of ions, etc. IV. Cell names. The names of cells often indicate their location and function. In general, the term site means a mature cell that resides in and maintains the tissue, e.g., a chondrocyte in cartilage. Hepatocytes are found in the liver. Neurons are for nervous system communication, and adipocytes are found in adipose tissue, where they store triglycerides fat. Various cell types can also have special endings. For example, the suffix ending blast indicates a cell that makes or builds something, e.g., a fibroblast makes fibers. The suffix clast means those which break down structures, e.g., an osteoclast breaks down bone matrix. Cells are the unit of life, and it is assumed you are already familiar with the basic concepts of cell structure. The first lab session is designed to reacquaint you with major cell structures and introduce you to microscopy. Knowing how to use the microscope to examine cells, tissues, and organs is a powerful skill, and that is another important goal of the first lab sessions of anatomy that are called microscopy. Summary of objectives for introduction to anatomy: to understand the language of anatomy and its specialized terminology, to introduce levels of organization, body regions, the anatomical and directional terminology that will be used during the course, to introduce the body cavities and lining membranes that will be seen during the course, to define cytology and introduce the basic concepts involved in cellular organization, to become familiar with the names of some cells and the tissues they form. Diagrammatic overview of a very basic histological technique practiced in our first anatomy lab: wet mount preparation of epithelial cheek cells.